The plaza in front of Vault Tower looked like a party that had been planned for months. There were flags. There were lights. There were giant screens showing smiling faces. People stood behind metal barriers with phones held high. Security guards walked in neat lines. Everything felt clean on purpose. Ashley Barrett stood just off the stage, clutching a tablet so hard her fingers hurt. Her smile was ready. Her nerves were not. "Remember," she whispered to the people around her, "we keep it tight. We keep it bright. We keep it—" A loud cheer rose as Homelander floated down from above, slow and perfect, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror 1,000 times. He landed with the smallest bend of his knees, not because he needed to, because it looked heroic. He smiled at the cameras. He waved. The crowd screamed like they had been waiting all day to breathe. Ashley's earpiece crackled. "Live in 3, she swallowed. "Okay. Okay." The 7 were lined up behind Homelander. Starlight stood near the edge, her smile softer, her eyes moving over the crowd like she was counting exits. A-Train bounced in place like he couldn't sit still. The Deep tried to look important. Black Noir stood still as a statue. 2, the voice said. Ashley lifted her chin. 1, Homelander stepped to the mic. "Hello, America!" A sound cut through his words. It was not a gunshot. It was not thunder. It was like reality itself had made a mistake. A green oval ripped open in the air 10 feet above the stage. The screens flickered. The lights dimmed for half a second. People gasped. The security team reached for weapons at the same time. Something fell out of the green rip. A man hit the stage floor and rolled. He was tall and thin. His hair was spiky and pale. His lab coat was scorched on one sleeve. He smelled like smoke and chemicals, even from several feet away. He pushed himself up like this was annoying, not scary. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked around. His eyes landed on the cameras first, then on Homelander. "Oh," he said, voice rough. "Great. A costume convention." Ashley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Homelander's smile did not move, but his eyes changed. He stared at the stranger like the stranger had spilled something on his shoes. "Who are you?" Homelander asked, still calm, still for the cameras. The stranger dug into his coat and pulled out a small metal device with a trigger and glowing lights. It looked like a toy, did not feel like a toy. "Who am I?" the stranger said. He glanced at the crowd like they were background noise. "Lady, I just fell out of a hole in the universe. Give me a second." Security rushed the stage. "Sir, put the device down." The stranger clicked the trigger without looking. A clear, shimmering bubble snapped into place around him. It was like hard glass made of air. The first guard ran straight into it and bounced back, stunned. The second guard hit it and slid down, blinking like he had no idea what happened. The crowd screamed. Phones kept recording. Some people ran. Some people leaned in closer. Homelander stepped forward. The stranger lifted a different gadget, smaller, like a coin with a button. He tossed it to the floor. A cold wave spread out in a circle. Boots stuck to the stage like glue. Several guards froze in place, not dead, not hurt, just locked like statues. One of them tried to speak and only managed a squeak. Starlight's eyes widened. She lifted her hands, light gathering in her palms, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Homelander tilted his head. "You think you can come into my city and do that?" The stranger looked Homelander up and down like he was scanning a broken machine. He pulled out a little handheld scanner, pointed it at Homelander, and frowned. "Huh," he muttered. "You're not magic. You're chemical. That's embarrassing." Homelander's smile twitched, just a little. Ashley felt like her heart was trying to claw out of her chest. She hissed into her mic. "Cut the feed! Cut the feed!" Someone whispered back, panicked. "We can't. It's everywhere." Homelander's voice hardened. Last chance. Put it down. The stranger sighed like a tired teacher. You're doing the whole alpha thing. It's cute, but I'm not in the mood. Homelander moved. He didn't fly. He didn't pose. He just stepped in and reached out, fast enough that most people would not even see it. His hand hit the clear bubble. And stopped. The bubble held. Homelander's fingers pressed harder. The air shimmered. The bubble didn't break. It pushed back. For a single second, the whole plaza went quiet. Even the crowd seemed to feel it. Like the world had just learned a new rule. Homelander stared at the barrier. Then he stared at the stranger. The stranger grinned, and it was not friendly. Yeah, he said. That's the look. That's the look of someone who's used to winning. He raised the portal device again, aiming it away from the stage. Now, if you'll excuse me, he clicked. A green rip opened on the far side of the plaza, near a fountain. The stranger stepped toward it. The green rip flickered. It shivered like a bad TV signal. It made a sharp, whining sound. The stranger stopped mid-step. His grin vanished. He looked down at the device like it had betrayed him. That's not right, he said. Low. Behind him, Homelander's eyes narrowed, bright with anger and interest. The stranger's thumb moved fast over the device, tapping settings, adjusting something. The portal rip sputtered, shrank, and snapped shut like a door being slammed. The stranger swallowed. He glanced up at the sky, like he was listening to something nobody else could hear. Then he muttered to himself, "Okay, so this universe is sticky. That's new." Homelander took one slow step closer. The stranger turned back, eyes sharp, again. And somewhere inside his device, a tiny light blinked once, like a signal had just been sent out into the dark. Stan Edgar watched the footage with no expression. He didn't flinch when the portal opened. He didn't move when guards bounced off invisible force. He didn't even blink when Homelander's hand stopped like it had hit a wall. He let the whole clip play to the end. Then he tapped the table once. "Containment," he said calmly. A man in a suit leaned forward. "Sir, we don't know what he is." Stan's eyes stayed on the screen, frozen on the stranger's face. "That," Stan said, "is why we will not treat him like a man we can bully." He looked at the list of options being pulled up on a second screen. Teams, assets, locations, legal plans. "Find out what he wants," Stan said. "And if he wants nothing, we will offer him everything." In a dim room that smelled like stale coffee and old sweat, Billy Butcher watched the same clip on a cracked laptop. Huey sat beside him, eyes wide. MM stood behind them with his arms crossed. Frenchie leaned in, fascinated. Kimiko watched without blinking. On screen, the stranger froze the guards like toys. Huey swallowed. "Okay, that's not normal." Butcher's jaw tightened. "That's not a soup." He replayed the moment where Homelander's hand hit the barrier and stopped. For the first time in a long time, Huey saw something like excitement in Butcher's face, dark and hungry. "Butcher," MM warned, already hearing the thought. Butcher pointed at the screen. "That thing," he said, "just told Homelander no like it was nothing." Huey looked at the stranger's coat, the scorched sleeve, the messy hair, the bored eyes. "He doesn't look like a hero," Huey said quietly. Butcher leaned back, smiling without warmth. "Good," he said. "Neither do we." The stranger did not stay in the plaza. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times. He threw 3 small discs into the air. They buzzed like angry insects. The discs flashed once, and the cameras near the stage died in a wave, screens going black one after another. He snapped the force bubble off and sprinted straight at the edge of the stage. Homelander lunged after him. The stranger slammed a button on his belt. The world bent. Not for everyone. Only around him. To the crowd, it looked like he had moved wrong, like his body had skipped, like a video that dropped frames. One moment he was on the stage, the next he was 10 feet away, landing hard near the barricade. He vaulted it, grabbed a screaming man by the collar, and shoved him behind a concrete planter. "Get down," he barked, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Starlight moved, fast and real. She didn't fly. She ran, dodging guards and frantic people. She reached the stranger just as Homelander's shadow swept over them. "You're going to get people killed," she snapped at the stranger. He looked at her. For a second, his eyes actually focused. "You're the only one here who's looking at the crowd," he said. "So you're either the real one, or you're the best actor." Annie flinched at the way he said it, because it felt like he could see through her. Homelander landed behind them, the ground cracking. The stranger didn't turn. He flicked his wrist, and a tiny drone shot out of his sleeve, whirring up toward Homelander's face. Homelander swatted it out of the air and crushed it in his hand. The stranger shrugged. "Okay, worth a try." Annie stepped between them without thinking. Light brightened in her hands. "Stop," she said to Homelander, voice low. "Not here." Homelander stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. The stranger leaned closer to Annie, fast, and whispered, "Your friend there is going to pop. When he pops, people die. So either distract him or move the crowd." Annie's stomach tightened. She hated that he was right. "You," Annie said to him. "Who are you?" The stranger opened his mouth. Then he hesitated, like giving his name would be giving away a weakness. He snorted. "Nobody you'd like." Homelander's eyes flashed red. Annie moved first, throwing a burst of light up and to the side, not at Homelander, but into the air. It was bright enough to make him blink. It bought half a second. The stranger used that half second. He tapped his belt again. Reality skipped. He vanished. Annie spun, searching, heart pounding. Across the street, the stranger appeared on the roof of a news van, stumbling like the jump had hurt more than he wanted to admit. He raised the portal device, jaw tight, and tried again. A green rip opened for a split second. It flickered. It died. He cursed under his breath. Homelander rose into the air, eyes locked on him. The stranger glanced at the sky again, that same listening look. Then he turned and sprinted across the roofline, moving fast, skipping space in short, ugly jumps, like he was forcing the universe to cooperate. He ended up in an alley behind a cheap electronics shop, breathing hard. He slammed the portal device against a brick wall, not enough to break it, just enough to punish it. "Come on," he hissed. "Work!" A tiny screen on the device flashed. Symbols scrolled. Warning lights blinked. He pulled out a screwdriver that looked like it belonged in a kid's science kit and popped the device open right there in the alley. Wires. Strange glowing parts. A smell like burnt sugar and metal. He worked fast, hand steady now, anger turning into focus. A shadow moved at the mouth of the alley. He didn't look up. He just said, "If you're here to sell me something, I don't have cash. If you're here to shoot me, take a number." Huey Campbell stepped into view, holding a pistol with both hands like he was afraid it might bite him. Huey's voice shook. Hi." Behind Huey, Butcher walked, and like he owned the alley. Butcher didn't point a gun. He didn't need to. His eyes were the weapon. The stranger finally looked up. He took in Huey's fear. He took in Butcher's grin. And he gave them a tired, sharp stare, like he had already decided what they were. "Oh," he said. "Great. Local criminals." "We're not local criminals," Huey blurted. Butcher chuckled. "Depends who you ask." The stranger's hand drifted toward his belt. Butcher lifted one finger. "Calm. Easy. We're not Vought." That word made the stranger pause. Just a tiny pause. He closed the portal device with a snap and stood. "Okay," he said. "Then who are you?" Butcher stepped closer, careful, like he was approaching a wild animal that could also build a bomb. "Name's Butcher," he said. "And you, mate, you just embarrassed the most dangerous man in this city." The stranger stared at him. Then he laughed once, short and rough. "Yeah," he said. "That was funny." Huey swallowed and tried to keep his hands from shaking. "We saw what you did," Huey said. To him. The stranger's eyes flicked to Huey's gun. "Put that away," he said flatly. "You're holding it like a scared toddler." Huey flushed and lowered it a little. Stepped into the alley next, broad and solid. Frenchie behind him, eyes bright with curiosity. Kimiko last, quiet, watching. The stranger's gaze moved over all of them. Quick, like a scan. Butcher said, "We've got questions." The stranger sighed. "Of course you do." He tapped his belt and a thin, invisible shimmer wrapped around him again, like a second skin. Huey's eyes widened. That's a force field?" The stranger rolled his eyes. "It's a personal safety layer. Don't make it weird." Butcher leaned closer, voice low. "You got a way to kill Homelander?" Annie's face flashed in the stranger's mind for a second. The crowd, the panic, the way she had tried to stop him without pretending he was good. He looked back at Butcher, and his expression turned cold. "I don't do jobs," he said. "I do exits." "But you could," Butcher pressed, hungry. "If you wanted." The stranger shrugged. "Sure, I could do lots of things." Frenchie couldn't hold it in. "Mon Dieu," he breathed. "The technology." The stranger cut him off. Yeah, it's advanced. Try not to drool." Stepped forward, voice steady. "What's your plan?" The stranger looked at them like the idea of a plan was both obvious and annoying. "I fix my portal," he said. "I leave. Your little superhero soap opera is not my problem." Kimiko made a small sound. Not a word. A warning. The stranger's eyes flicked to her. He read the violence in her posture. He read the control holding it back. He nodded once, like he respected that more than anything else so far. Then Huey asked the question that actually mattered. "Why? Didn't it work?" Huey said. "The portal. You tried twice." The stranger's jaw tightened. He looked down at his device. The screen blinked again. A small icon pulsed, like a sonar ping. He closed his hand over it so they couldn't see. "This universe is off," he said, choosing simpler words like it annoyed him. "The math is sticky, like trying to slide on gum." Butcher's eyes narrowed. "So you're stuck?" The stranger's mouth twisted. "Temporarily." said. "Then you need a place." The stranger snorted. "I need a lab." Frenchie's eyes lit up. "We can provide." Butcher cut in, fast. "We can provide, but you work with us." The stranger stared at Butcher for a long beat. Then he did something that made Huey's stomach drop. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had decided to play. "Okay," the stranger said. "Here's the deal. You give me a place with power, space, and quiet. You don't touch my stuff. You don't point me at your enemies like I'm a dog. And if anyone tries to put me in a cage..." He tapped his belt. A tiny portal the size of a coin opened in the air between them. Through it, Huey could see a bright, spinning nothing that made his eyes hurt. The stranger closed it with a snap. "I turn your whole day into a science lesson," he finished. Butcher's grin returned. "Fair," Butcher said. "Now tell us your name." The stranger hesitated again. He spat to the side, like names were annoying too. "Rick," he said finally. "Just Rick." Huey blinked. "Rick. What?" Rick's eyes went flat. "Just Rick," he repeated. Vought moved faster than the public knew. By morning, the event was a terrorist incident. By noon, it was an extraterrestrial threat. By evening, it was under investigation. And by night, lawyers were already hunting. Rick sat in the back of the boys' battered van, arms crossed, watching the city through a dirty window. Butcher drove like the rules didn't exist. MM watched the mirrors. Huey kept glancing back at Rick like he expected him to vanish. Frenchie had tried to ask 3 questions already. Rick answered none of them. When the van finally rolled into a hidden warehouse space, Rick stepped out and looked around. "It's ugly," he said. "Perfect," Butcher gestured. "Home sweet home." Rick walked inside, opened his coat, and started pulling out parts like he had a whole hardware store in there. He slapped a device on a table. It beeped. It started scanning the room, sending out soft pulses. MM frowned. "What's that?" Rick didn't look up. "It's telling me if you're trying to poison me, shoot me, or betray me." Huey swallowed. "Is it accurate?" Rick glanced at him. "It's more accurate than your face." Huey shut up. Annie arrived later, alone, hood up, slipping through the warehouse door like she had done it before. Butcher tensed the moment he saw her. "Sunshine," he said, voice sharp. "You lost?" Annie ignored him and looked at Rick. "You," she said. "What you did out there, you made it worse." Rick didn't stop working. "I saved people too." "You didn't even look at them," Annie snapped. Rick finally looked up. His eyes were tired. Old tired. Not sleepy tired. "I'm not your hero," he said simply, "and you're not theirs." Annie flinched because it hit close. Then Rick added, softer but still blunt, "But you tried. So you get points." Huey blinked. "Did you just compliment her?" Rick made a face. "Don't make a thing out of it." Annie stepped closer, watching his portal device. "Can you get home?" she asked. Rick's jaw tightened. "I should be able to," he said. "But something grabbed my signal when I jumped. Something noticed." Butcher leaned in. "Who?" Rick's eyes flicked to him. "You don't want to know?" Rick said. Frenchie tried again, careful. "Then we must hide you." Rick snorted. "You can't hide me from the kind of thing that can follow portal math." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin, clear sheet of plastic with tiny printed words. He tossed it to Butcher. Butcher caught it and frowned. "What's this?" Rick's voice was dry. "A contract." Huey stared. "A contract?" Rick nodded toward the page. "It says you don't sell me to your corporate buddies, you don't record my work, and you don't try to make me sign any of your stupid NDAs." Butcher looked up, suspicious. "You made this just now?" Rick shrugged. "I hate paperwork, so I made anti-paperwork paperwork." MM rubbed his face. "This is insane." Rick went back to his work, like that settled it. Annie watched him for a moment longer. Then she asked, "Quiet. Why do you care if people die?" Rick didn't answer right away. He tightened a screw. He connected a wire. Then he said, without looking up, "I've seen too many worlds where people die for no reason. Your world is one of them." Annie's throat tightened. "So you're going to fix it?" Rick laughed once, bitter. "I'm going to fix my portal." But Huey saw something in the way Rick's hands moved. Fast, skilled, almost careful. Like Rick was building an exit and a shield at the same time. Stan Edgar did not send soldiers first. He sent a woman with a smile and a thick folder. She arrived at the warehouse area with 2 men in suits and 1 small drone that hovered like a polite insect. The men didn't know they were being watched by Kimiko from above. The woman called out into the empty lot, "Rick, we would like to speak." Rick stepped out, alone, hands in his pockets, like he was meeting someone for an annoying appointment. Butcher watched from behind a cracked door, jaw clenched. The woman held up the folder. "Mr. Rick, VOD International would like to offer you resources and protection. We can... Rick held up a hand. Stop. She paused. Rick pointed at the folder. Is that an NDA? The woman blinked. It's standard. Rick sighed like his soul left his body. Of course it is. He pulled out a small stamp from his coat. He slammed it on the folder without touching her. The stamp clicked in the air. The folder burst into dust. Not fire, not explosion, just instant dust, like it had turned 1,000 years old in a second. The woman froze. One of the suit men stumbled back. Rick looked at her and smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. I'm not signing anything, he said. Tell your boss that. The drone hovered closer. Rick snapped his fingers. The drone fell out of the air like a rock. Rick turned and walked back inside without another word. Butcher let out a low whistle. Okay, he murmured. That's useful. Annie shot him a look. That's terrifying. MM nodded. Both. Rick came back into the warehouse and shut the door hard. He stared at his portal device. That pulsing icon blinked again. He clenched his jaw. Somewhere far away, beyond the sky and beyond this world, something had heard him. And it was listening back. The invitation to the lab came the next day. It was not a man in a suit this time. It was a message on a secure screen Rick had hacked without asking. A single line appeared, clean and cold. We have materials you need. Below it, a location pinged, deep underground, VOD-owned, hidden. Butcher leaned over Rick's shoulder, eyes bright. It's a trap. Rick didn't look up. Yeah, then we don't go, Huey said quickly. Rick finally turned. He held up a small metal part, turning it between two fingers. My portal needs a stable high-energy catalyst, he said. Your world has a chemical soup in its blood, and your corporate overlords definitely have the refined version in a fridge somewhere. Annie's stomach sank. Compound V. Rick pointed at her. See? You know the brand name of your poison. That's wild. MM stepped forward. If you go, you don't go alone. Rick snorted. You're not coming. Butcher's grin sharpened. Try stopping us. Rick stared at him, then looked away like arguing was a waste. Fine, Rick said. Come. But don't touch anything. And if you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind. Huey's voice cracked. In the lab? Rick's eyes slid to him. Yes. Huey swallowed hard and nodded anyway. Rick looked back at the screen. The location pin blinked, and under it, in smaller code that only Rick noticed, was a hidden signature. Not votes. Not human. Rick's face went still. He didn't tell them. He just pocketed the portal device, grabbed his coat, and said, Let's go steal from the people who tried to buy me. The black site sat under a building that looked boring on purpose. Rick walked through the front door like he belonged there. The guard at the desk opened his mouth to speak. Rick tapped a small device on the counter. The guard blinked, smiled, and waved him through like Rick was a VIP. Huey's eyes went wide. Did you just... Rick kept walking. Don't talk. Butcher glanced at the guard, impressed and annoyed at the same time. They took an elevator down. 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 The air got colder. The lights got brighter. The walls got thicker. Frenchie whispered, This place. It feels like a freezer for secrets. Rick didn't answer. The elevator opened into a clean hallway with glass panels and security doors. A woman in a lab coat waited there, smiling too hard. Rick, she said warmly. Welcome, we're honored. Rick looked past her into the lab. Rows of tanks, vials, machines, a smell like alcohol wipes and metal. He nodded once. Show me the goods, the woman gestured. Of course. But first, we have a simple form for you to sign. Rick stopped. He turned his head slowly. Are you serious? He asked. The woman blinked. It's just a... Rick pulled out his stamp again. But before he could slam it, the hallway lights snapped red. Metal shutters dropped over every door. The glass panels turned dark. The lab coat woman stepped back fast, like she had been waiting for the moment. A voice came over the speaker system. Calm. Smooth. "Rick," Stan Edgar said, "thank you for coming. This will be much easier if you cooperate." Butcher's eyes went wild. "Oh, you sneaky." Huey's breathing sped up. "We're trapped." Rick stared at the ceiling speaker. Then he smiled. "Okay," he said. "So you're dumb." The speaker clicked. "Excuse me?" Rick lifted his hand and flicked a switch on his belt. A clear force bubble snapped around the whole group. Butcher smirked. "I like this bloke." Alarms blared. And then the footsteps came. Fast ones. Heavy ones. A train appeared at the far end of the hallway like a blur, stopping so sharply the floor squealed. The Deep stepped out behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Black Noir slid from the shadows, like he had been there the whole time. A-Train pointed at Rick. "You're coming with us." Rick looked at him like he was a noisy appliance. A train moved. He lunged forward, speed building into a punch meant to break bones. Rick didn't move. He dropped a small marble on the floor. The marble rolled. It beeped. A-Train hit an invisible patch of air and flipped like he had run into a wall at full speed. He crashed into the hallway side, hard, and slid down, coughing. A-Train blinked. Shocked. "What?" Rick sighed. Predictable. The Deep charged next, angry because he needed to look brave. Rick lifted a finger and fired a thin line of foam that wrapped around the Deep's ankles and yanked. The Deep slammed face first into the floor, groaning. Butcher snorted. "That's for the fish jokes." Black Noir didn't rush. He threw a knife. The knife hit Rick's force bubble and bounced away. Black Noir's head tilted, calculating. Rick tossed a small drone into the air. It zipped up, scanned the hallway, and projected a heat map in thin red lines. Black Noir froze for half a second. Rick's eyes followed the red outline on the wall. "There you are," Rick said. He tapped a button. A panel in the wall popped open and sprayed a net of thin wires. Black Noir dodged most of it, fast and skilled. But one wire wrapped around his arm. It tightened like a snake. Black Noir yanked, muscles straining. Rick clicked his tongue. Strong, but not smart enough. The wire pulsed. Not electricity. Something else. Black Noir's muscles locked for a second. Just long enough. Kimiko moved. She shot out of the bubble as Rick opened a narrow gap for her, like it was nothing. She hit Black Noir with a clean, brutal strike and knocked him down. She didn't kill him. She didn't need to. MM grabbed Huey's shoulder. "Stay behind the field." Huey nodded, wide-eyed. Over the speaker, Stan Edgar's voice stayed calm. "Impressive." Rick didn't look up. "Stop watching and start learning, corporate guy." Then the air changed. It wasn't heat or cold. It was pressure. Like the hallway itself had gotten heavier. Rick's head turned toward the ceiling. He heard the sound of something landing far above, then sinking through the building like it didn't care about walls. A shadow fell over the glass, and then Homelander stepped into view at the end of the corridor, floating an inch off the floor. His eyes were bright and angry. His smile was gone. He looked past Rick's gadgets, past the downed teammates, and locked on Rick like a predator finally seeing the real target. "Well," Homelander said softly, "there you are." Butcher's voice went low. "Rick." Rick stared at Homelander, unimpressed on the outside, alert on the inside. "That's the one," Butcher whispered, almost eager. Homelander drifted closer, slow on purpose, like he wanted Rick to feel small. "You humiliated me," Homelander said. Rick shrugged. "You humiliated yourself." Homelander's jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" Homelander asked. Rick lifted his scanner again and pointed it at Homelander, like he was checking a barcode. "You're a flying lab accident wearing a flag," Rick said. "Congrats." Homelander's eyes flashed red. Annie's voice suddenly came over the lab intercom, strained. "Stop. Don't." She was here too. Somewhere behind the walls, trapped in the same facility, pulled in by Vought's plan. Homelander didn't care. Red light fired from his eyes. It hit Rick's force field. The field flared, bright and loud, like glass being struck with a hammer. Heat rolled through the corridor. Huey flinched and covered his face. Rick's field held. But Rick felt it. The pressure. The power behind it. Homelander wasn't weak. Homelander was trying to burn, through a wall that was not supposed to exist. Rick's mouth tightened. "Okay," he muttered. "You're annoying." Rick snapped his fingers. A small disc floated out and hovered in front of the force field. It spun and shimmered like a mirror made of air. Homelander fired again. This time, the beam bent. It curved up into the ceiling and cut a clean line through concrete, missing everyone. Homelander paused, surprised. Rick leaned forward a little. "See? Redirect. Simple." Homelander surged forward. He punched the force field. The whole bubble shook. The air screamed. Rick's boot slid back half an inch. Butcher felt it too. The raw strength. The rage. Homelander hit again, faster. Rick's field flickered. Rick's eyes narrowed. He was not scared. He was thinking. "All right," Rick said, voice flat. "No more hallway." He lifted his portal device and clicked it toward the floor under Homelander. A green oval opened. Homelander dropped one foot into it before he could stop. He jerked back, but not before the portal snapped shut. Homelander's boot was gone. Not cut off. Not bleeding. Just relocated. Homelander stared at his bare foot, confused for a split second. Then he snarled. "What did you do?" he roared. Rick shrugged. "Sent your shoe to the sun. It was ugly." Huey almost laughed, then stopped because Homelander's face was terrifying. Homelander's eyes burned brighter. He floated higher, preparing to blast everything. Over the speakers, a different alarm began to blare. Not the same siren. This one had a low, ugly tone, like a warning meant for disasters. Stan Edgar's voice came back, sharper now. "All personnel, initiate containment protocol." Butcher's eyes widened. "That sounds bad." MM's voice was tight. "That's because it is." Hidden vents opened in the ceiling. Thick gas began to pour in. Not tear gas. Not sleep gas. Something heavier. Something meant to kill anything in the room, including the lab workers behind the walls. Annie's voice came again, strained and furious. "Edgar, there are people down here." Stan's reply was calm. "We will accept losses." Rick's head snapped toward the vents. For the first time, his face looked truly angry. "Wow," he said softly. "You guys really are the worst kind of stupid." Homelander didn't care about the gas. He didn't care about the workers. He only cared about Rick. He dove. Rick opened a portal the size of a door to the side. Homelander's charge went through it. For half a second, Homelander vanished. Then he slammed back out of a different portal behind him, crashing into the wall like he had been thrown by an invisible hand. Rick had made a loop. Homelander shook it off instantly, furious. But it bought seconds. Rick turned to the boys. "You want to be heroes today, or do you want to watch people die?" Butcher opened his mouth to argue. Annie's voice cut through everything, over a nearby door speaker, desperate. "Rick, help me get them out." Rick's jaw clenched. He didn't like being asked. He liked being needed even less. But he hated waste. He slapped 2 devices onto the wall. The metal door beside them melted open, not into liquid, but into soft, foam-like chunks that fell harmlessly. Behind it, lab workers stumbled, coughing, eyes wide with fear. "Move!" Rick snapped. "Up! Now!" MM and Huey pulled people through. Frenchie guided them with fast, gentle hands. Kimiko lifted one woman like she weighed nothing. Butcher stared at Rick, frustrated. We could end him right now. Rick didn't look at Butcher. You're not ending anything if you're dead. Homelander recovered and fired lasers again, sweeping the hall, not aiming at Rick now, but aiming at the exits, trying to cut off escape. Rick flicked his wrist. A line of floating discs rose like shields and caught the beams, bending them away into empty walls. Concrete burst. Sparks flew. A worker screamed. Rick snapped, "Keep moving!" Annie burst through a second door, covered in dust, eyes blazing. She threw light at Homelander's face, not to hurt him, but to blind him. Homelander roared, swinging a fist at her. Rick's force field popped between them at the last second, catching the punch like a wall. Annie stared at Rick, shocked. Rick didn't meet her eyes. "Don't get emotional. Get out." Then Rick's portal device beeped. A new sound, a high, sharp chirp. Rick froze for one heartbeat. Huey saw it, the tiny change in Rick's posture, like a man hearing a familiar knock on his door. "What is it?" Huey asked, fear creeping back. Rick didn't answer. Above the facility, far above the thick concrete and steel, the sky tore open. Not green. Not like Rick's portal. This was a cold white ring that looked clean and wrong, like it had been cut with a perfect blade. 3 sleek shapes dropped through it. They were not planes, not drones from any army Huey had ever seen. They moved too smoothly, too quietly. They hovered over the city like they owned the air. Then they fired thin beams down through the ground, not caring what they hit. In the lab, the lights flickered. A wall screamed as it was cut open from above. Stan Edgar's voice came over the system again, and for the first time it wasn't fully calm. "What is that?" he asked. Rick looked up at the ceiling, face hard. "That," Rick said, "is what happens when you trap a man who's being hunted." A hole opened in the ceiling like a circle being punched out of the world. A silver probe dropped through, spinning, scanning. It didn't look at Homelander. It didn't look at Annie. It didn't look at Butcher. It locked onto Rick. A clean, flat voice came from the probe, not through speakers, but through the air itself. Anomaly confirmed. Huey's blood ran cold. Rick's eyes narrowed to slits. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Rick said. The probe fired. Rick raised his hand. A transparent shield snapped up. The shot hit, and the shield flared. Rick's boot slid back again. This beam was different. It wasn't heat. It was something that tried to pull his gadgets apart, like it was reading and ripping at the rules inside them. Rick gritted his teeth. Homelander stared at the probe, confused and furious. "That's not mine," he snarled, like the world had insulted him. The probe ignored him. Another probe dropped. Then another. They cut through walls and floors like paper. Vought security teams screamed and ran. Lab workers panicked. Alarms became noise. Rick looked at the boys and Annie, all of them staring up at the new threat. He made a fast choice. "Evac route," he snapped. "Now." He threw a portal open, big, stable, just barely. It didn't lead home. It led outside the facility, into a dark service tunnel that ran toward the river. Rick held it with one hand like it weighed a ton. "Move!" he barked. Shoved people through. Huey helped a man who was limping. Frenchie guided 2 more. Kimiko carried another. Annie hesitated, looking back at Homelander. Homelander floated, eyes darting between Rick and the probes, rage battling confusion. He was used to being the biggest thing on the field. Now he wasn't sure. Annie stepped through the portal last, breath shaking. Butcher stayed a beat longer, staring at Rick. "This is bigger than him," Butcher said, voice tight, almost angry that it was true. Rick's eyes stayed on the probes. "Yeah." Butcher leaned in, low. "Don't you run?" Rick's laugh was sharp. "You don't get to tell me what to do." A probe fired again. Rick's shield flared and cracked at the edge. Rick's jaw clenched. He flicked a small device at the floor under the probes. Gravity flipped. The probes dropped hard, smashing into the ground, skidding like coins thrown on a table. For half a second, Rick had space. He snapped his portal wider, forced it stable, and stepped back through. The portal closed behind him like a slammed door. In the lab, Homelander roared in fury as the probes rose again, scanning. One probe angled toward a broken cabinet. Inside were vials in a cold rack, clear liquid, blue label, Compound V. The probe's beam grabbed a vial like an invisible hand. It lifted it. Then a white ring opened above it, clean and cold. The probe shot up through the ring with the vial, and the ring snapped shut. They spilled out into the service tunnel, coughing, running, dragging strangers they had never met. Huey looked back and saw nothing but darkness behind them. No Homelander, no probes, just the sound of far-off sirens and the deep, ugly rumble of a facility breaking apart under forces it was not built to handle. Rick leaned against the tunnel wall for 1 second, breathing hard. Annie stared at him. "Those things, they came for you." Rick wiped his mouth again, slower now. "Yeah," he said. MM's voice was low. "What are they?" Rick's eyes were fixed on his portal device. The tiny light on it blinked again, like a heartbeat. He didn't look up when he answered. "Trouble," he said. "The kind that doesn't stop once it finds a scent." Butcher stepped close, voice like a blade. "And they just stole V." Rick's jaw tightened. "Yeah," Rick said again, and this time it sounded like a promise and a threat at the same time. Huey's stomach dropped. "If they have that, what happens?" Rick finally looked at Huey. His face was serious. No joke, no grin. "Then your world," Rick said, "just got added to someone else's list." He pushed off the wall and started walking, already thinking, already planning, already angry. Behind them, far above the city, something in the sky watched the place where Rick had been and learned the way in. The tunnel spat them out near the river, under a bridge where the city noise turned into a low, dirty hum. People coughed and leaned on the damp concrete. A few lab workers cried without sound, like they were afraid to waste air. Sirens wailed far away. Above them, helicopters cut across the sky, lights sweeping the streets. Huey kept looking up, waiting to see a white ring open again. Rick didn't look up at all. He crouched beside a puddle and ran quick checks on his portal device like it was a wounded animal. His fingers moved fast. His face stayed tight. MM counted heads. He spoke in a calm voice, but his eyes were sharp. "We got everyone?" Kimiko nodded once. She had a woman's arm over her shoulder, holding her steady. Frenchie knelt beside a man with a cut on his forehead and pressed a cloth to it. "Breathe, yes?" "Slow." Annie stood a few steps away, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her anger in. Her eyes were on Rick. Butcher paced like a dog that wanted to bite a fence. He kept glancing toward the city, toward Vote Tower, toward the place where his hatred lived. When Rick finally stood, Annie stepped forward. "Those things," she said. "They didn't come for Homelander. They came for you." Rick gave her a tired look. "Yeah, I heard you the first time." "What are they?" Huey asked. His voice sounded small in the wet air. Rick's jaw worked once. He chose his words like he hated having to choose them. "Trackers," he said. "They find tech. They find people. They take what they want." "But who made them?" Huey pressed. "Where do they come from?" Rick stared at him for a beat. Then he said, from a place you can't shoot. That shut Huey up. Butcher stepped in, and they just nicked Compound V. Rick's eyes flicked to him. Butcher's grin tried to show up again. It failed. It came out as a thin, ugly line. Rick nodded once. Yeah, they did. MM's voice was low. If they have that, they can make more like Homelander. Rick didn't answer right away. He looked up now, finally, but not at the sky. Saw the city lights, at the shape of a world that didn't know it was being hunted. Maybe, Rick said. Annie took another step. So stop them. Rick laughed once. No humor, just air and bitterness. I'm not your soldier, he said. I'm not asking you to be, Annie snapped back. I'm asking you to not let people die because you're stubborn. Rick's eyes narrowed. Annie's hands were still faintly glowing, like her body didn't trust the dark. Rick looked away first. Fine, he said. I'll handle my problem. Butcher caught that word and bit down on it. Your problem is our problem now. Rick's head turned. Slow. His eyes were flat. You don't get to claim my problems, he said. That's not how this works. Butcher stepped closer anyway, like he couldn't help it. Then here's a problem you can claim. Homelander. Rick's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something close to disgust. I met your flying baby man, Rick said. He's not interesting. He's loud. Butcher's voice sharpened. He's a monster. Rick looked at him, really looked at him, and something about Butcher's hunger showed through. Rick spoke quiet. And you want to use me to feed your monster? Butcher didn't flinch. I want him dead. MM moved between them a little, just enough to keep it from snapping. Not here, MM warned. Rick turned away. He walked to the edge of the water and crouched again. He pulled out a small metal cylinder and tossed it into the river. It sank, then flashed once under the surface. Annie watched him. What was that? Rick didn't look back. A ping. To who? Huey asked. Rick's shoulders lifted. To me. If another ring opens, I want to know before it's on my head. Huey's stomach twisted. So it could happen again tonight. Rick's voice was calm, like he was talking about rain. It could happen right now. That silence that followed felt heavy. Then Rick straightened and looked at the group of lab workers again. People who had been trapped in a place built for secrets. A little boy stood among them, maybe 10. He held his mother's hand so hard his knuckles were white. His eyes were huge. The boy stared at Rick like Rick was a monster too. Rick stared back for a second. Then Rick reached into his coat and pulled out a small patch, like a sticker. He tossed it gently to the boy's mother. She flinched, then caught it. It's a filter, Rick said, voice rough. Put it on his chest. It'll help his lungs for a day. The mother blinked, confused. Why? Rick's answer came fast, defensive. Because the air here is garbage, and your city smells like fear. He turned and started walking. Huey jogged after him. Where are you going? Rick didn't slow down. To a place with power and walls. Butcher followed too. You mean the warehouse? Rick glanced over his shoulder. Yeah, the ugly one. The one that makes me want to vomit, Frenchie huffed. Such charm. Rick kept walking. I'm building something. Annie's voice came behind him. What? Rick stopped in the middle of the dark street under the bridge. He looked back at her. A lock, he said. A jammer. A way to stop the trackers from smelling me. But you said you needed things, MM said, already thinking ahead. Rick nodded once. I do. Butcher's eyes sharpened. From Vout. Rick's eyes narrowed. From whoever has the parts. Annie's gaze held steady. And if they come again before you finish? Rick's mouth went tight. He looked up at the sky again for a single second. Then we improvise, he said. He started walking again. And in the distance, behind the lights, Vought Tower stood like a black tooth in the city. By morning, the story had been rewritten. Huey watched it happen on a cracked TV in the warehouse. The news showed shaky phone footage of the plaza, cut down to a few seconds. The portal, the screaming, the chaos. Then the anchorwoman's voice, smooth and firm. Vought International confirms an attack by an unknown terrorist using experimental technology. The screen cut to a Vought spokesperson, calm and practiced. We are grateful to the Seven for their swift action. The footage showed Homelander hovering with smoke behind him, jaw clenched, eyes bright. It looked heroic if you didn't know what came before. It didn't show his hand stopping on Rick's barrier. It didn't show the lab workers choking in gas. It didn't show the white ring in the sky. Huey swallowed hard. They're making it a PR thing. Leaned on the wall, arms crossed. That's what they do. Frenchie paced, restless. They erase what does not fit the story. Annie stood near the door, hood down now, eyes tired. People will believe it, Butcher snorted. People believe anything if you put a flag behind it. Rick sat at a table covered in junk. Wires, tools, a half-open portal device. He didn't watch the TV at all. He watched a small screen beside him, filled with moving lines and numbers. Huey stepped closer. Careful. What's that? Rick didn't look up. Background noise. That's not noise, Huey said. It looks like maps. Rick flicked a switch. The screen showed a pulsing ring in the city, then another, then nothing. He stared at the empty space where the signal had been. Last night, Rick said, they scanned, grabbed the vial, and left. Annie's voice was tight. So they're gone. Rick's mouth twisted. They're not gone. They got what they came for. Now they test it. Frowned. Test it where? Rick looked up then. His eyes were hard. Somewhere safe, Rick said. Somewhere with a lab that makes Vought look like a high school science fair. Huey's stomach turned. Butcher leaned in from the side. So we stop him. Rick stared at Butcher like Butcher was a math problem he didn't want. I stopped them, Rick corrected. You survive. Butcher's smile tried to show up again. We can help. Rick pointed a screwdriver at him like a knife. You help by not getting in my way. Butcher's eyes flashed. Don't talk to me like... Rick cut him off. Like what? Like you're not special? You're a guy with rage and a coat. I've seen 1,000,000 of you. Butcher's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it hurt. Stepped in, voice controlled. Enough. Rick exhaled through his nose. He went back to his device. Then the warehouse door rattled. Kimiko was already moving before anyone else. She climbed the metal stairs without sound and looked through a crack in an upper window. Outside, 2 men in suits waited near the street. One held a folder, the other held a small case, and behind them, a third figure stood a few steps back, casual, like he had time. A woman. Polished, hair perfect, smile ready. Victoria Newman. Kimiko's eyes narrowed. Downstairs, Annie stiffened. That's her! Butcher's face went cold. Of course it is. Huey's throat went dry. Should we run? Rick didn't even glance up. Why? Because, Huey hissed. That's a congresswoman who can... Rick finally looked at Huey. Who can what? Huey swallowed. Explode heads. Rick blinked once. Then he went back to his tools. Okay, that's gross. Newman's voice carried through the door, bright and friendly like a TV commercial. Hello? She called. I'm here to talk. No tricks. Butcher laughed once, sharp. That's literally all she does. Rick stood up and walked to the door, like he was opening it for a delivery. Grabbed his arm. Don't. Rick looked at Mm's hand on him. Let go. Rick opened the door. Newman smiled wider when she saw him, like she had won something. "Hi," she said. "You must be Rick." Rick's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" Newman held up a thin paper, like a printout. "You left a signature and a little burst of code on a device you crushed at the plaza." Rick's mouth twitched, annoyed, not shocked. Newman leaned in just a little. Rick Sanchez. Huey felt a weird jolt at the full name, like the story had just turned a page. Butcher's eyes sharpened even more. "Sanchez." Rick stared at Newman. "So you stole my trash?" Newman shrugged. "It was on the street. Public." Rick's voice went flat. "That's not how ownership works." Newman kept smiling. "In this country, it kind of is." She gestured to the men beside her. "I came with an offer. Protection. A partnership. A way to keep you from being hunted by Vought." Rick's eyes flicked to the folder. "Is that a contract?" Newman didn't deny it. "It's a legal framework." Rick sighed like his soul was tired. Butcher stepped into view behind. "Rick." "Tell her to shove it." Newman's eyes slid to Butcher. The smile didn't change. "Billy Butcher." "Hi." Butcher's face stayed blank. "Don't say my name like we're mates." Newman's voice stayed sweet. "I want to keep people safe." Annie stepped forward too. "By doing what?" "Owning him." Newman's smile flickered for half a second, then recovered. "By making sure he doesn't become a threat." Rick raised an eyebrow. "I'm already a threat." Newman laughed lightly. "I know. That's why I'm here." She looked Rick up and down, like she was seeing a tool, not a person. "If you work with me, we can set rules. We can shape what happens next." Rick stared at her. Then he leaned closer, voice low and sharp. "You're not offering rules. You're offering a leash." Newman's smile hardened. "And you're offering chaos." Rick's eyes went cold. "Chaos is what you get when you build your world on lies." Newman's gaze sharpened too. For the first time, her friendly mask cracked enough to show something hungry behind it. "Think about it," she said, still soft. "This city will hunt you. Vought will hunt you. But I can make that stop." Rick tilted his head. "How?" Newman's eyes held his. "I can make people reconsider." Huey felt his stomach drop. Rick looked at her like she was a stain on the floor. Then Rick reached behind him, pulled out his stamp, and pressed it against the air. The folder in the suit man's hand turned to dust again. Newman blinked, surprised despite herself. Rick's voice was calm. "No." Newman's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "You're making a mistake." Rick shrugged. "I make mistakes all the time. I just survive them." Newman took a step back. "We'll talk again." She turned to leave, but as she walked away, she glanced over her shoulder at Annie. "Starlight." Annie's face tightened. "Don't." Newman's smile sharpened. "Be careful who you trust." She left with her men, heels clicking on broken pavement like she owned the street. The door shut. Silence settled. Huey let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "She knows your name now." Rick tossed the stamp back on the table. "She knows a label. Big deal." Butcher's voice was rough. "She'll use it." Rick's eyes narrowed. "Everybody in this world uses things." Annie watched him. What did she mean? "Talk again." Rick didn't answer right away. He looked at his screen again, the empty space where the signal had been. Then he said, "It means your world has too many people who think control is the same as safety." MM's voice was tight. "So what do we do?" Rick grabbed a fresh set of parts from his coat and dumped them on the table. "We build," he said. Frenchie leaned in, unable to help himself. "Build what?" Rick looked at him. A dimensional anchor and a signal scrubber. Huey blinked. In English, Rick sighed. A lock and a muffler. Annie frowned. So they can't find you. Rick nodded. So they can't find me. But, MM said, already seeing the problem. You said you needed parts. Rick's gaze lifted. I need refined catalyst. I need clean power. And I need time. Butcher's eyes lit in a dangerous way. Vought has the catalyst. Rick nodded. Yes. And, Butcher added, the military has power. Rick gave him a dry look. Yes. Butcher leaned in. So we hit both. Annie's stomach tightened. If you hit Vought, people get hurt. Rick's voice was flat. People are already hurt. Annie's eyes flashed. Not because you have to. Rick's hands paused for a single second. Just a second. Then he went back to work. Huey watched him and felt something strange. Rick acted like nothing mattered. But he kept building shields instead of bombs. He kept saving strangers even when he complained. And now, he was building a lock on the universe itself. Not just for him. Rick didn't say it out loud. But Huey could feel it. Rick knew if he didn't do this, the next ring in the sky would be bigger. And it wouldn't stop at one vial. Across town, in a clean office that smelled like money, Stan Edgar listened to a report without moving his face. A man in a suit spoke carefully. We traced a data signature from the plaza. The subject's name appears to be Rick Sanchez. Stan's eyes stayed calm. And his location? We have several possible sites, the man said. Nothing confirmed. Stan leaned back slightly. He refuses contracts. Yes, sir. Stan's voice stayed even. Then stop sending contracts. The man hesitated. Sir? Stan's eyes sharpened, just a little. Send what he wants. The man swallowed. What he wants appears to be materials. Stan nodded once. Then we offer him a lab. Off the books? The man asked. Stan didn't blink. Everything is off the books if you don't get caught. He stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below him like a board game. Rick Sanchez is not like our assets, Stan said calmly. He cannot be intimidated. He cannot be bought with fame. So we will do something simple. The man waited. Stan's voice was cold. We will create a problem only we can solve. Homelander watched his own face on TV and felt sick. The footage made him look heroic. It made him look in control. But he remembered the barrier. He remembered his hand stopping. He remembered the moment where he wasn't sure what would happen next. He stood alone in a private room, high in Vought Tower, fists clenched. Ashley hovered near the door, shaking, pretending she wasn't shaking. Homelander spoke without looking at her. Where is he? Ashley swallowed. We don't know. Homelander's head turned slowly. You don't know. Ashley forced a smile that looked like pain. We're trying. Stan. Stan has teams. Homelander's eyes narrowed. Stan! Ashley nodded fast. He said we should be careful. Homelander laughed. It wasn't happy. Careful. He walked to the window and stared out at the city like it was his toy. Then he spoke quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. Nobody makes me look weak, Ashley whispered. You didn't look weak. Homelander's head snapped toward her. Ashley froze. Homelander smiled. Yes, he said softly. I did. He walked closer to her. His voice stayed gentle. And I don't like that feeling. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. Homelander leaned in, his breath warm. Find him. Ashley nodded, frantic. Yes, yes, I will. Homelander stepped back and looked at the TV again. The anchorwoman was still talking about heroic containment. Homelander's eyes narrowed. His anger shifted. It didn't get smaller. It got focused. Next time, he murmured, I don't punch the wall. He looked at his reflection in the glass. I break what's holding it up. That night, the warehouse became a factory for impossible things. Rick took over one corner, like it was his territory. He ran cables across the floor, snapped parts together, and built a tall frame of metal that looked like a broken doorway. Frenchie hovered near the edge, trying not to cross Rick's invisible line. Every now and then, Frenchie couldn't help himself. "This coil here, it is like—" Rick cut him off. "Not like anything you've seen. Don't touch it." Frenchie raised his hands. "I do not touch. I only admire from safe distance." Huey sat on a crate and watched Rick's hands. He watched the way Rick moved when he worked, like the work was the only time he wasn't bored. Annie paced, restless, listening to police sirens outside. Checked locks. He checked exits. He checked everyone's faces. Butcher watched Rick like Rick was a loaded gun sitting on the table. Rick finally stopped and looked at the group. "I need refined catalyst," he said. "Your compound V, but cleaner. More stable." Annie's jaw clenched. "That stuff is poison." Rick nodded. "Yeah, so is your air. Welcome to Earth." said, "Where do we get it?" Rick tapped a map on a screen. A red point flashed under a vault facility. "Down there," Rick said. "Deep storage? Cold vault? Probably has a cute name like Wellness Center." Butcher's eyes gleamed. "We hit it." Rick looked at him. "I hit it. You carry things." Huey swallowed. "And the power source?" Rick pointed to a second map point. A military site near a coast. Big fence, big lights. "They've got a prototype core," Rick said. "High output. Clean enough to run my anchor." Frowned. "How do you know?" Rick shrugged. "I listened to your radio traffic for 10 minutes. Your military tells secrets like it's gossip." Annie crossed her arms. "If we do this, people get hurt." Rick's face stayed flat. "Then don't do it loud." He turned back to his build. Annie watched him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Do you ever care about anything?" Rick didn't answer right away. He tightened a bolt. He tested a line. Then he said, low, like he hated the sound of his own honesty, "I care about not being trapped." Annie's voice softened. "And everyone else?" Rick's shoulders lifted. "Sometimes. I care by accident." Butcher snorted. "Touching." Rick didn't look at him. "Shut up." The room went quiet again, filled with the hum of Rick's machines. And above them, far away, the city kept believing the story it was fed. For now. The next move didn't come from Vought first. It came from the sky. Huey woke up to the sound of Rick's alarm device screaming. It wasn't loud like a siren, it was high and sharp, like a knife in his ears. He scrambled up, heart pounding. Was already moving, grabbing his bag. Butcher was already at the window. Annie ran in from the other room, hair messy, eyes wide. Rick stood at his screen, face hard. A white dot pulsed over the city map. Huey whispered, "No." Rick's voice was flat. "Yes." Annie swallowed. "Where?" Rick pointed. "A hospital. A normal place. Bright lights. Lots of people." Butcher's voice went low. "Why a hospital?" Rick's eyes narrowed. "Because that's where your Vought freaks go when they're hurt." Jaw tightened. "They're hunting V." Rick nodded once. "And they're doing it smart now." Annie's face went pale. "We have to stop it." Rick stared at the map. His fingers hovered over controls. Then he made the call. "Fine," he said. "We do the hospital first. Then we steal what I need." Butcher's eyes flashed. "And Homelander?" Rick's gaze snapped to him. "He's not the only problem in your life." Butcher's mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. Not now. They moved. And as they left the warehouse, Rick's half-built anchor frame sat behind them, unfinished, like a lock on a door that hadn't been closed yet. The hospital looked normal from the outside. That made it worse. Ambulances came and went. Nurses hurried in the lobby. Families sat in chairs with tired faces. No one looked at the sky. Rick stood across the street in a shadowed doorway, eyes scanning. He wore his coat open like he didn't care, but his body was tense. Huey stood beside him, hands shaking. "How do you know they're here?" Rick lifted a small device. "Because they're loud in the math." Annie stood on Rick's other side, hood up, trying to look like a normal person. She failed. Her fear made her shine in a way even her hoodie couldn't hide. And Frenchie were farther back, watching entrances. Kimiko moved along the alley wall like a shadow. Butcher leaned close to Rick. "What's the plan?" Rick didn't look at him. "We keep civilians alive. We don't let them take V. We don't let them take my tech." Butcher's voice was sharp. "And if Homelander shows?" Rick finally looked at him. "Then your flying man baby gets another lesson." Huey wanted to laugh. He couldn't. Rick stepped forward and raised his hand. A tiny drone zipped out, silent, and slid under a hospital door. Rick's screen showed a clean hallway inside, then a flash. A white ring, small, opening inside a supply closet like it was nothing. Huey's blood ran cold. 3 silver shapes slid through, smaller than the probes from before. Sleeker. Quiet. They moved like they had learned. They didn't blast walls this time. They used tools that cut locks without sound. They moved toward a secure elevator that went down. Rick's jaw clenched. "They already know where the stash is," Annie whispered. "How?" Rick's eyes narrowed. "Because Vought leaks. Because your world is sloppy. Because fear makes people careless." He stepped into the hospital like he owned it. Huey grabbed his sleeve. "Rick!" Rick yanked free. "Stay close or stay out." Inside, the air smelled like cleaning spray and sick people. The lights were too bright. Rick walked fast, head down. His eyes flicked to cameras, to corners, to exits. At the elevator, a guard stood confused, staring at a door that had been cut open like butter. The guard saw Rick and raised his gun. "Stop!" Rick tapped a button on his belt. The guard froze mid-word, locked in place like a statue, eyes wide. Huey stared. "You can just do that?" Rick didn't slow down. "Yes, don't make it weird." They took the stairs down. Annie's breathing was tight. She could feel something ahead, like a cold, clean emptiness where people should be. They reached a lower level with thicker walls, a special wing. Vought security. Rick muttered, "Of course." A door at the end of the hall was marked restricted. The door was already open. Inside, a small room held a cold storage unit. Clean labels, blue caps, compound V in neat rows. And standing beside it were 2 silver agents, not human, not quite machine either. Their faces were smooth. Their eyes were black. One of them held a vial like it was a prize. Annie's stomach flipped. "No." The silver agent turned its head toward them. Then it spoke in that same flat tone, like a robot reading a list. "Anomaly present." Rick stepped forward. "Yeah, it's me. Hi." The agent raised its hand. A thin beam fired. Not heat, not light. It was like a force that tried to pull the screws out of Rick's gadgets. Rick's shield snapped up. The beam hit and made Rick's shield flicker like it was being edited out of reality. Rick's eyes narrowed. "Okay, that's new." He tossed a small disc. It landed near the agent's feet and exploded into a net of glowing lines. The lines wrapped around the agent's legs and hardened. The agent tried to step. It couldn't. Rick smirked. "Get boxed." The second agent didn't fight the net. It simply opened a white ring behind itself. It stepped backward toward the ring, still holding the vial. Annie surged forward, light flaring in her palms. She fired a blast that struck the agent's shoulder. The agent stumbled, but it didn't scream. It didn't bleed like a person. It adjusted its grip on the vial and kept moving. Rick's voice snapped, "Don't let it leave." Huey did the dumbest, brave thing in his life. He ran. He ran past Rick's shoulder and grabbed the agent's arm with both hands. The agent looked down at him like Huey was a bug, then it lifted Huey off the ground with one hand. Huey's feet kicked. His hand slipped. Annie screamed, "Huey!" Rick's eyes went hard. He didn't shoot the agent with a gun. He did something worse. He opened a portal the size of a dinner plate right behind the agent's head. On the other side was a concrete wall. The agent's head snapped sideways as its own movement slammed it into the wall through the portal. It staggered. It dropped Huey. Huey hit the floor and gasped. Rick closed the portal and stepped in. Fast. He grabbed the agent's wrist and twisted. The vial flew into the air. Rick opened a second portal under it. The vial fell through and vanished. Annie's eyes widened. "Where did you send it?" Rick's voice was tight. "A box that doesn't exist in your world." The agent recovered and lunged. Rick's shield flared again as the beam hit him. This time, the beam started to chew the shield faster. Rick's jaw clenched. He pulled a small tool from his sleeve and stabbed it into the floor. A pulse spread through the room. For a second, everything with that white ring signature flickered. The ring behind the agent stuttered. The agent froze mid-step. Rick's eyes flashed. "That's right. I can jam your door too." He snapped his fingers. Kimiko burst into the room like a blade. She hit the agent in the side of the head with a punch that would have broken a normal person's skull. The agent flew into the wall and slumped. Annie stared, chest heaving. Huey sat on the floor, shaking, eyes wide. "That thing was going to take me." Rick looked down at him. "It would have dissected you. Then it would have thrown you away. So yeah, don't grab it next time." Huey swallowed. "Okay." Sirens began to blare in the hospital wing. Vought security was coming. Annie grabbed Huey's arm and pulled him up. "We have to go." Rick stared at the cold storage unit. His eyes flicked over the labels, the wiring, the lock. He reached out and touched the metal casing like he was reading it through his fingertips. Then he whispered, "Refined storage, stable temp. Of course." He turned to the others. "We're not leaving this untouched." Annie's face tightened. Rick cut her off. "I'm not stealing all of it. I'm taking a sample and the method." He pulled out a small chip, pressed it to the unit, and it copied data in a blink. Then he took a single vial from the rack, held it up to the light, and frowned like it smelled bad. "This stuff," he muttered, "is a crime with a logo." Butcher's voice crackled in Rick's earpiece. "Oi, police are swarming the area, and you're not gonna like this." Rick's eyes narrowed. "Say it." Butcher's voice went low. "Homelander's here." Annie's stomach dropped. Rick's face didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like a knife being pulled from a sleeve. "Fine," Rick said. "Then we do this fast." Homelander landed in front of the hospital entrance, like a god stepping onto a stage. Cameras were already there. They always were. He smiled for them. But behind the smile, his eyes hunted. He could smell fear in the air. He could hear heartbeats. He could feel the truth under the lies. He wanted Rick. He wanted that feeling of weakness to vanish. He stepped inside the lobby. Patients screamed. Nurses froze. Security tried to speak. Homelander didn't bother with them. He listened. Footsteps below. A burst of light. A strange hum of tech. He started walking toward the stairs. Then a nurse stepped in his way, trembling. "Sir, you can't—" Homelander didn't even look at her. But he didn't kill her either. Not because he cared. Because cameras were watching. He stepped around her like she was furniture. As he moved, his eyes flicked to a TV in the corner. The screen showed his own face from yesterday. Heroic. Controlled. He hated it. He hated that the lie still felt like a mask. He kept walking. Down the stairs. Toward the basement. Toward the smell of something that did not belong. Back in the underground wing, Rick led them out through a service door with a clean cut in the metal, like someone had unzipped it. They moved into a narrow maintenance tunnel that ran under the hospital. It was dark. It smelled like dust and old pipes. Huey stumbled once. Annie caught him. Rick walked in front, scanning. Butcher's voice crackled again. "He's moving inside. He's coming down." Annie whispered, "We can't fight him here." Rick's voice was flat. "Then we don't fight him here." He stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels met. He slapped a device on the wall. A thin, shimmering line spread across the tunnel like an invisible curtain. "What is that?" Annie asked. Rick looked at her. "A suggestion." She frowned. "That's not an answer." Rick smirked once. "It suggests to his eyes that this tunnel is empty." Huey blinked. "You can trick his vision?" Rick shrugged. "He's a biological camera with anger issues. Cameras can be hacked." They ran. Behind them, Homelander's footsteps hit the tunnel entrance. He paused. His head tilted slightly, like a dog sniffing. He saw the tunnel junction. He saw nothing. His jaw tightened. He knew he was being played. He hated being played. He fired his heat vision down the left tunnel. The beam carved through pipes and concrete, making steam burst like blood. Then he fired down the right tunnel, then the center. He didn't care what broke. He only cared that Rick was somewhere in the dark. Rick felt the heat behind them like a sun brushing his back. He didn't slow down. He just muttered, "Overgrown toddler." They burst out through a maintenance hatch behind the hospital into a fenced-off loading area. MM and Frenchie were waiting with a stolen van. Butcher stood beside it, eyes bright with danger. "Got what you needed?" Butcher demanded. Rick held up the vial between 2 fingers. "Part 1. "But the trackers?" MM asked, scanning the sky. Rick's eyes narrowed. "They didn't get the stockpile." Annie's voice shook. "But they still got some before." "From the lab." Rick nodded, grim. "And now they learned something else." Huey swallowed. "What?" Rick's gaze went distant for a second, like he was seeing future math. "They learned they can use civilians as cover," Rick said. "They learned you care." Annie flinched. Rick snapped the vial into a padded case and shoved it into his coat. "Now," Rick said, "we steal the power source." Butcher grinned. "That's my language." Annie grabbed Rick's sleeve as he moved toward the van. "If we keep escalating like this, people will die." Rick stopped and looked at her. His voice was quieter than before. "People will die either way." Annie's eyes burned. "Not if we choose better." Rick stared at her for a long second. Then he said, "Rough. Fine. You want a better choice? Help me finish the lock. After that, you can go back to your hope speeches." Annie let go. They climbed into the van, and above the hospital, Homelander burst out onto the roof, eyes blazing, scanning the city like it was his property. He saw the van's tail lights in the distance. He smiled, not for cameras this time, for himself. The military site sat near the coast, wrapped in fences and floodlights. A sign read, "Authorized personnel only." Rick read it out loud, deadpan, as the van rolled to a stop in a dark ditch nearby. "Authorized," Rick said. "That's funny." MM checked his gun. "This isn't a joke." Rick looked at him. "Everything is a joke. Your problem is you don't know which kind." They moved through tall grass toward the fence. Frenchie carried a bag of tools and looked like a kid walking into a candy store, except he was terrified. Huey whispered, "How do we get in?" Rick pulled out a small rectangle, slapped it onto the fence, and the metal unzipped in a clean line. He peeled it open like a door. Huey stared. "That's cheating." Rick stepped through. "Yes." They crossed the yard low and fast. A guard tower turned its spotlight away from them at the wrong moment, like it had been, distracted. Rick hadn't touched it. but the light moved anyway. Rick's eyes narrowed. He didn't like coincidences. They reached a warehouse-like building marked with plain numbers. Inside, the air smelled like oil and cold steel. Rick's scanner pinged. "Core's here," he muttered. They moved down a corridor. Then the hallway lights flickered, and on Rick's screen, a white ring signature blinked once. Rick froze. Whispered, "What?" Rick's voice went low. "They're here too." Annie's face went pale. "Why would they?" Rick cut her off. "Because I'm predictable." A door ahead slid open without anyone touching it. 3 silver agents stepped out, calm and clean. One held a tool that hummed like it was hungry. The flat voice came again. "Anomaly. Capture recommended." Huey's throat tightened. "We're not even safe at a military base." Rick's eyes went hard. "Nope." The agents raised their tools. Rick moved first. He tossed a handful of tiny discs into the air. They spread out like coins in a wind, then stopped in perfect positions. A grid snapped into place. The first agent fired its beam. The beam hit the grid and bent, splitting into harmless lines that carved the ceiling instead of Rick's body. Rick stepped forward through the grid like he was walking through rain. He opened a portal under the second agent's feet. The agent dropped, but instead of falling into nothing, it fell onto a concrete slab 10 feet above them, where gravity had been flipped. It slammed into the slab and stuck there, limbs twitching. Frenchie gaped. "You flipped gravity." Rick didn't look at him. "Yes." The third agent moved around the grid, fast. Kimiko met it. She didn't have Rick's tech. She had speed, strength, and rage under control. The agent swung a humming tool at her head. Kimiko ducked and drove her elbow into its ribs. It didn't break like a human. It bent like metal. It grabbed her shoulder with a cold grip. Kimiko snarled. Annie surged forward, light bursting from her hands and slamming into the agent's face. The agent staggered. Fired bullets at it, and the bullets sparked off its body like hitting armor. Huey backed up, breathing hard. Rick watched the agent adjust in real time. Then Rick pulled a small device from his pocket and clicked it. The agent's body stuttered, not like it was hurt, like it was losing connection. Rick's voice was cold. "No signal. No mission." The agent tried to open a white ring. The ring flickered. Rick's jammer held. The agent's head turned toward Rick. For the first time, the flat voice changed. Not emotion. Recognition. "Countermeasure identified." Rick's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, and I'm improving." He opened a portal behind the agent and pushed it backward through it. On the other side was a sealed metal container Rick had brought without telling anyone. The agent slammed into it. Rick snapped the portal shut. The container rattled like something was clawing inside. Frenchie stared. "You trapped it." Rick shrugged. "Temporarily." MM's voice was tight. "We need the core." Rick didn't waste time. He sprinted down the corridor like the fight was just a delay, not the main event. They followed. They reached a wide room with a heavy metal case in the center, surrounded by cables and warning signs. The case looked like a coffin for a machine. Rick's eyes lit with focus. "That's it," he said. Huey whispered. "What is it?" Rick slapped his scanner on the case. "A power core, high output, clean." Annie's voice was tight. "Can we take it without blowing up a base?" Rick glanced at her. "Yes, if I do it." He pulled out a tool and started cutting cables in a pattern that made no sense to anyone else. Then the room shook. A deep boom rolled through the building. Spun. "What was that?" Rick's screen flashed. Another white ring signature. Bigger. Rick's jaw clenched. "They're bringing heavier tools," Rick muttered. Annie's breath hitched. "How many of them are there?" Rick's voice was flat. "Enough." Butcher's voice crackled through the earpiece. "You've got company outside." Rick didn't answer. He kept cutting. Huey said, panicked, "We're going to get trapped again." Rick snapped the last cable free and lifted the core like it wasn't that heavy, even though Huey could tell it was. Rick shoved it into a backpack he had built for it, with thick straps and shock padding. "Move," Rick said. They ran. As they hit the corridor, the walls ahead split open with a clean cut. A white ring opened right in front of them. Not a small one, a door. Something stepped through. Not a probe, not a silver agent. This one was taller, heavier, built like a soldier made of clean metal and dark glass. Its eyes were black. Its chest held a glowing shape that pulsed like a heart. It raised one hand. The air changed. Rick's gadgets hummed like they were being pulled apart by an invisible magnet. Rick's shield flickered hard. Huey froze. "Rick!" Rick's voice was quiet. "Okay." Not scared, just annoyed. Rick lifted his portal device and clicked. Nothing happened. The portal flickered and died. Rick's eyes narrowed. "You're jamming me." The metal soldier spoke in that flat voice. "Anomaly must be secured. Technology must be acquired." Rick's jaw tightened. Yeah. Annie stepped forward, light building in her hands. "Get away from us." The metal soldier didn't look at her. It looked at Rick. It took one step forward. Rick's shield cracked at the edge. Raised his gun, but his eyes said he knew it wouldn't matter. Kimiko crouched, like she was ready to launch anyway. Then Rick did the one thing the metal soldier didn't expect. Rick dropped the backpack with the core at his feet. Huey's eyes widened. "Rick!" Rick didn't look at him. "Trust me." The metal soldier's eyes flicked to the backpack for half a second. Rick used that half second. He pulled out his stamp and slammed it against the floor. Not paper. Concrete. The stamp clicked. The concrete under the metal soldier turned to dust in a perfect circle. The soldier dropped like an elevator cut loose. It fell into a deep shaft of dust and broken floor. Rick opened a portal under the falling soldier. The soldier vanished through it. On the other side was the ocean. 100 feet above the waves. The soldier dropped into the dark water with a heavy splash. Rick snapped the portal shut. Annie stared at him. "You just..." Rick grabbed the backpack again and yanked it onto his shoulders. "I didn't kill it," Rick said. "I relocated it." Huey gasped. "It can swim!" Rick started running. "Then it's getting a workout." They bolted through the base, alarms screaming now, lights flashing, guards shouting. But the guards weren't their biggest threat. Above them, outside, white rings began to flicker in and out over the yard like blinking eyes. Rick's screen flashed warnings. Rick's jaw clenched. He didn't like how fast they were learning. They reached the fence. Rick slapped his rectangle tool onto it again. The fence unzipped open. They rushed through and sprinted toward the van. Butcher was already in the driver's seat, engine running, eyes wild. "Get in!" he shouted. They piled inside. The van roared forward, bouncing over rough ground. As they sped away, Huey looked back. For a split second, he saw a white ring open over the base. Something large moved behind it, like a shadow of a bigger machine. Then the ring snapped shut. Huey's stomach dropped. "That's not over," he whispered. Rick didn't answer. He stared at his screen. He watched the white ring signatures fade. But he also saw something else. A tiny trace, a copied pattern. Like they had sampled his jammer for a moment. Like they had learned the shape of his lock. Rick's grip tightened on the seat. Annie watched him, voice quiet. "They're adapting." Rick nodded once. "Yeah." Frenchie swallowed. "So we must build faster." Rick's eyes stayed hard. "We must build smarter." Butcher leaned back, grinning through the fear. "That's more like it." Rick didn't smile. He looked out at the road ahead, at the city, at Vote Tower in the distance, at a world that was now on a list. And he made a choice without saying it out loud. He wasn't just building an exit anymore. He was building a door that could stay shut, even if this world didn't deserve it. When they got back to the warehouse, Rick slammed the backpack onto the table like he was dropping a trophy. The core hummed inside it. Rick started wiring it into the half-built frame at once, hands moving like he was racing the universe. Frenchie hovered close, unable to help himself. But this time, Rick didn't shove him away. "Hold that," Rick snapped, pointing to a cable. Frenchie blinked. "Me?" Rick glared. "Yes, you. Don't shake." Frenchie grabbed the cable with careful hands like it was a live snake. "I do not shake." Huey watched and felt a strange thing. Rick didn't trust people. But Rick used people when he had to. And when he used them for something bigger than revenge. Annie stood back, arms crossed, and watched Rick connect the core to the frame. "What happens when you turn it on?" she asked. Rick didn't look up. "It anchors my signal, scrubs my trail, makes it harder to track." Annie's eyes narrowed. Harder. Not impossible. Rick's mouth tightened. Nothing is impossible. Everything is just expensive. Frowned. "And if it works?" Rick finally looked at them. His eyes were tired again, but focused. "If it works," Rick said, "the next ring doesn't open over your city. Not easily." Butcher leaned in, voice low and hungry. "And if it doesn't?" Rick's voice was flat. "Then we get a bigger fight." As if summoned by the word, the TV in the corner flickered on by itself. The screen showed breaking news. A vote facility had been hit. There were reports of unknown attackers, reports of missing product. A blurry clip showed a white ring in the sky for half a second before the feed cut. Annie's stomach sank. "They're hitting Vote again." Rick's jaw clenched. He stared at the screen. Then he looked back at his half-built anchor. His hands moved faster. "Finish," he muttered to himself. Butcher watched Rick with a grin that didn't fit the fear in his eyes. "Welcome to the war," Butcher whispered. Rick didn't answer. He flipped a switch. The frame lit up with a thin, clear glow. The air around it tightened, like the room had become a sealed box. Rick stared at the readings. For a moment, the white ring signatures on his screen went quiet. Not gone, just pushed back. Rick exhaled once, slow. Then a small warning icon blinked on the corner of the screen. A simple message. "Beacon risk. High output detectable." Huey frowned. "What does that mean?" Rick's face went still. "It means," Rick said quietly, "the lock works." Annie's eyes narrowed. "But?" Rick looked at them. His voice was low. "But if I push it too hard," he said, "it also tells the hunters where the door is." The room went quiet again. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, a man who acted like he didn't care stared at a machine that could save a world or paint a target on it. And somewhere far away, in a place with clean white rings, something cold and patient adjusted its plans. Not with anger, with interest. Because now it knew one more thing. Rick Sanchez was not just running, he was building a wall. And walls were meant to be tested. 2 weeks changed the warehouse in ways the city would never see. The outside still looked the same. Rusted doors, cracked windows. A street light that blinked like it wanted to quit. But inside, the air had a different sound now. A steady hum, a soft pulse, like the building had a heartbeat. Rick had turned one corner into a lab that looked like a fight had happened between a hardware store and a spaceship. Cables ran along the ceiling. Metal frames stood like half-built doorways. A big power core sat in a cradle of bolts and foam, humming like a trapped storm. And taped to one of the support beams was a paper sign in black marker. No contracts, no NDAs, no just sign here. It had been Huey's idea. Rick had pretended to hate it. He hadn't taken it down. Every morning, Vought tried something new. A courier drone would hover outside and drop a folder through a broken window. A friendly email would appear on a laptop Rick didn't even own. Once, a man in a suit walked up to the door with a clipboard, like he was delivering a pizza. Rick stamped every single attempt into dust. Sometimes he did it without looking. Frenchie started calling it the ritual. Rick called it garbage removal. Huey sat on a crate with a roll of tape and tried to look useful. He was getting better at it. That was the scary part. "Hold this," Rick said, pushing a small coil into Huey's hands. It buzzed, warm, a little too alive. Huey flinched. "Is it supposed to do that?" Rick didn't look up. "Yes," Huey swallowed. "If I drop it, do we explode?" Rick finally glanced over. "Only you." Huey stared. "That's not funny." Rick went back to soldering. "It's a little funny." Annie stood a few feet away, watching the readings on Rick's screen. The white ring signatures were quieter now, pushed back, not gone. Above the data, the warning still sat like a threat. "Beacon risk, high output detectable." Annie pointed at it. "You keep leaving that there like it's not a problem." Rick shrugged. "It's a problem. It's also a fact." MM came in from the door, wiping rain off his jacket. Cops rolled past twice. Butcher followed him, face hard, eyes bright with that same old hunger. "They're circling. Vaught's circling." Rick didn't care about the cops. He cared about the math. He tapped his screen and watched a new set of dots light up. Tiny devices he had planted across the city over the past week, on rooftops, under bridges, in abandoned subway tunnels, a quiet net, a lock with many teeth. "What's that?" Annie asked. Rick didn't look at her. "Nodes." "Nodes for what?" Rick sighed like she was making him do homework. "For a collateral damper." Huey blinked. "A what?" Rick pointed with his soldering tool. "It's a field. It eats the worst of the impact." Annie frowned. "So, like a shield?" Rick shook his head. "Not a bubble. Not a cage. It doesn't stop people from fighting." "But it stops," Huey started. "It stops a building from turning into a graveyard," Rick finished. "It redirects the big stuff. The stupid stuff. The I punched a bus because I'm mad stuff," Butcher scoffed. "You're building a safety net for Soups." Rick's eyes flicked to him. Cold. "I'm building a safety net for everyone who gets crushed when Soups throw tantrums." Butcher stepped closer. "And you could build a weapon." Rick didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I can build lots of things. You don't get to pick which ones I make." Butcher's jaw clenched. Annie watched the two of them like she was standing between a lit match and gasoline. She had learned the hard way that Butcher's anger never got smaller. It just found new shapes. Then Rick's screen flashed. Not a white ring this time. A message. A simple meeting request, pushed through 3 layers of hacked security like it owned the place. No papers, no cameras. 1 hour. Location. A private conference room, Vought Tower. Butcher laughed, sharp. "Oh, he wants to talk." MM's face tightened. "It's a trap." Rick stared at the message without blinking. "Obviously." Annie stepped closer. "Don't go." Rick leaned back in his chair, annoyed. "I'm going." "Why?" Annie snapped. Rick tapped the screen. "Because the guy who runs the circus is finally tired of sending clowns." Butcher's smile turned ugly. "Let me come." Rick looked at him like he was a stain. "No." Butcher stepped forward anyway. "Rick." Rick cut him off. "If you walk into that building, you start a war in the lobby." Butcher's eyes burned. "Good." Rick's voice stayed flat. "Not good." Annie crossed her arms. "So what? You'll just sit with Stan Edgar and have tea." Rick stood, grabbed his coat and checked the portal device like a man checking a gun. "I'm not there to be friends," he said. "I'm there to see what he wants, and what he's hiding." He glanced at Huey. "If I'm not back in 1 hour, assume I'm annoyed." Huey blinked. "Annoyed means what?" Rick walked toward the door. "It means you should run." Vought Tower felt like it was built to make people feel small. The lobby was clean. Too clean. The floors shined like they had never met dirt. The guards wore uniforms that looked like costumes. The air smelled like expensive soap. Rick walked in like he didn't care. 2 guards moved to stop him. Rick didn't touch them. He didn't freeze them. He just lifted his stamp, pressed it against the air, and clicked. Both guards' earpieces turned to dust at the same time. They blinked, confused, fingers touching empty ears. Rick strolled past. Upstairs, a private elevator opened by itself. Rick stepped in. The doors closed. A voice came through a speaker inside the elevator. Calm. Smooth. "Mr. Sanchez," Stan Edgar said. Rick rolled his eyes. "If you say my name like that again, I'm leaving." Stan didn't react. "I appreciate you coming," Rick snorted. "No, you don't. You appreciate that you can't stop me." The elevator rose in silence. The doors opened to a quiet floor with soft carpet and blank walls. No posters, no slogans, no smiles. A conference room door stood open. Stan Edgar sat at the far end of a long table. No guards inside. No folder. No pen. Just a glass of water and a calm face. Rick walked in and didn't sit. Stan watched him like he was watching weather. "You're unusual," Stan said. Rick pointed at him. "You're boring." Stan nodded once, as if accepting a fact. "Fair." Rick leaned on the back of a chair, eyes scanning. He was looking for microphones, cameras, traps. He found none. Stan's voice stayed even. "Vought has made attempts to acquire you. Those attempts failed." Rick smiled thinly. "Yep." Stan folded his hands. "I don't want to acquire you." Rick blinked once. "That's a lie." Stan didn't blink back. "I want to work with you." Rick's smile vanished. "That's the same thing with better words." Stan's eyes stayed calm. "You want resources, power, space, materials, time." Rick's jaw tightened. "Everybody wants time." Stan continued. "You also want to keep your freedom." Rick stared at him. Stan slid a small device across the table. Not a contract. Not paper. A key card. "1 lab," Stan said. "No oversight. No cameras. No marketing. You build what you need. You leave when you want." Rick didn't touch the card. Stan added, "In return, I want 2 things." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Here it comes." Stan's tone didn't change. "First, you keep your war out of my building. Second, you give me safe versions of whatever you build. Defensive versions." Rick laughed, short and sharp. "Defensive versions." Stan's eyes held steady. "Your presence has already pulled an outside threat into our world. It stole our asset. It attacked our facility. It will return." Rick's face went still for a moment. Stan leaned forward slightly. "I can't stop it with speeches. I can't stop it with lawsuits. I can't stop it with superheroes." Rick stared at him. Stan continued. "I need control." There it was. The real word. Rick's mouth twisted. "You want to put a seatbelt on the universe." Stan didn't deny it. "I want to keep people alive." Rick snorted. "You gassed your own workers." A flicker crossed Stan's eyes. Small, controlled, not guilt, calculation. "We accepted losses," Stan said, "because we had limited options." Rick's voice dropped. Sharp. "You always say that. Limited options. It's how cowards justify murder." Stan didn't raise his voice. "You are not here to judge me." Rick leaned in, eyes cold. "And you are not here to buy me with a key card." Stan held his gaze. "Then what are you here for?" Rick reached into his coat, pulled out his stamp and pressed it against the keycard. Click. The keycard didn't turn to dust. It just cracked down the middle like a broken promise. Rick flicked both halves onto the table. "I'm here to tell you something," Rick said. "You can't control what's coming." Stan stared at the broken card, then back at Rick. "And you think you can?" Rick's answer came fast. "No." That seemed to confuse Stan more than anything else. Rick straightened. "But I can build a lock. I can reduce damage. I can keep your city from becoming a testing ground." Stan's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that?" Rick paused, just for a breath. Then he shrugged like he didn't care. "Because I hate hunters." Stan watched him carefully. "And what about Homelander?" Rick's mouth twitched. "What about him?" Stan's voice stayed calm, but the air shifted. "He will not tolerate you. He will escalate." Rick smiled. "That's his hobby." Stan leaned back. "Then we are at an impasse." Rick turned to leave. "Yep." Stan spoke again. Quiet. "Rick Sanchez." Rick stopped. Stan's voice was almost gentle. "This world is built on control. If you refuse to be controlled, you will be destroyed." Rick looked back over his shoulder. His eyes were tired. "And if you try to destroy me," Rick said, "you're going to learn a new kind of limited options." He left. He didn't see Stan Edgar's face change. It didn't. But inside Stan's calm, a new line had been drawn. Rick was not an asset. Rick was a storm. When Rick returned to the warehouse, Butcher was waiting like he had been waiting his whole life. "You met the big boss," Butcher said. Rick tossed a small black chip onto the table. "Yeah." Huey blinked. "What's that?" Rick shrugged. "A copy of their deep files." Annie's eyes widened. "You stole from Stan Edgar in an hour?" Rick rolled his eyes. "He invited me into his house. It would have been rude not to take something." Butcher leaned in, hungry. "Does it have what we need?" Rick stared at him. "It has what you want." Butcher's grin sharpened. "Homelander." Rick didn't answer. He plugged the chip into a screen. Files opened. Names, videos, internal reports, payments, cover-ups. Huey's stomach turned as he scrolled and recognized faces. Smiles on TV, blood in the shadows. Annie's hands tightened into fists. "This is proof." Exhaled slow. "This could burn them." Butcher tapped the screen hard. "Burn them later. Kill him now." Rick's eyes narrowed. "No." Butcher's face hardened. "No?" Rick's voice stayed flat. "You heard me." Butcher stepped closer, voice rising. "This is the chance. You can end it. You can end him." Rick didn't back up. "You don't want him ended," Rick said quietly. "You want to be the one who ends him." Butcher flinched like he'd been slapped, then turned it into anger. "Don't psychoanalyze me, you lab coat." Rick cut him off. "You're not complicated." Butcher's eyes went wild. "You think you're better?" Rick's gaze was sharp. "No. I think I'm honest about what I am." Butcher leaned in, voice low and poisonous. "If you won't do it, I'll find another way." Annie snapped. "Butcher, stop!" Butcher ignored her. "You hear me, Rick. I'll use whatever I have to." Rick stared at him for a long moment. Then Rick said, calm and cold, "If you point Homelander at this place on purpose, I will remove you from the equation." Butcher smiled like he liked that threat. "Try." Huey stepped between them, shaking but stubborn. "Please, both of you." Rick's eyes flicked to Huey. The tension eased by half a hair. Butcher's didn't. Butcher stepped back, jaw clenched, and walked toward the door like he needed air. Followed him, but not close enough to start a fight. Annie stayed by the screen, staring at the files like she was seeing her whole life in a new light. "These people," Annie said softly, "they did all of this, and they got away with it." Rick didn't look at her. He started typing fast. "What are you doing?" Huey asked. Rick's fingers didn't stop. "Building a dead man's switch." Huey's face went pale. "A what?" Rick glanced up. "If they kill me, the files go public." Annie's eyes sharpened. "So you were going to leak it?" Rick shrugged. "Maybe." Annie took a step closer. "Rick." Rick held up a hand. "Don't make it a speech." Annie swallowed. Then Rick's screen flickered. A new signature appeared. Clean. White. Perfect. The warehouse lights dimmed for 1 second, and a small white ring opened in the air over Rick's workbench, like an eye blinking open. Huey froze. Annie's hands lit up. MM reached for his gun. Kimiko moved into a crouch without sound. Frenchie whispered, "No, not again." Rick didn't flinch. He leaned closer to the ring, irritated like someone had knocked during a shower. A voice came through the ring, flat and calm. "Rick Sanchez, we can end your pursuit." Rick's eyes narrowed. "You're already ending my mood." The ring brightened, and an image formed. Not a face, not a person. A clean symbol that shifted like it didn't want to be understood. The voice continued. "We offer you a stable exit. We offer you safety." Huey whispered, "They're talking." Annie's voice was tight. "Don't listen." Rick stared at the ring. "What do you want?" "Your anchor design, your countermeasure, your vial." Rick's jaw tightened. "No." The voice didn't change. "Your world is not yours. It is resources. It is testable." Annie's breath caught. Rick's eyes went cold. "You want to farm this place," Rick said. "We want to study it. We want to scale it." Rick looked at Annie, at Huey, at the worn faces in this warehouse. People who were messy and scared and angry and still trying. He looked back at the ring. "And if I refuse?" Rick asked. The voice stayed flat. "Then we open the door, larger. We take more." Rick smiled. It was not friendly. "Okay," Rick said. "Then here's my offer." He lifted his stamp. The voice paused, as if confused by the idea of paper tools. Rick clicked the stamp against the air. The white ring stuttered. The symbol flickered. Rick spoke fast, sharp, like he was throwing a chain around a moving target. "You connected to speak to me," he said. "That means you connected to me, and that means you left a thread." The ring shook. Annie's eyes widened. "Rick!" Rick slammed a switch on his anchor frame. The warehouse hummed louder. The warning on the screen flashed like a siren. Beacon risk. Critical. Outside, the sky over the city trembled. Huey's stomach dropped. "Rick, what are you doing?" Rick didn't look at him. "Setting a trap." The white ring tried to widen. Rick's jammer punched back. The ring shrank. Fighting. The voice turned sharp for the first time. "Cease!" Rick's eyes burned. "No!" He snapped his fingers. A second ring opened beneath the first, green and ugly and loud. It swallowed the white ring like a mouth closing. Then both rings vanished. Silence slammed down. The warehouse lights steadied. The hum dropped back to normal. Huey stood frozen, heart pounding. "Did you eat their portal?" Rick exhaled slowly. His hand shook just a little, then steadied. "I redirected their handshake," Rick said. "Now I know the shape of their door." Annie stared at him. "And the beacon risk?" Rick looked at the warning still blinking. "It means," Rick said quietly. They felt that. MM's voice was low. "So they're coming." Rick nodded once. "Yeah." But this time, Rick didn't look like he wanted to run. He looked like he wanted to build faster. The next day, the city felt tense, in a way that didn't show on the weather app. People still went to work. Cars still honked. News anchors still smiled. But under it, something was vibrating. It was fear. Vought felt it too. They tried to drown it with ads and speeches. Homelander tried to drown it with himself. He stood on a rooftop with cameras pointed up at his face, telling the world that Vought had everything under control. His smile was bright. His eyes were not. Because he could feel something else in the air now. Not fear. Resistance. He hated that more than anything. Then his phone buzzed. He didn't use it often. It felt too normal. But this one was from Stan. Location. Now. Homelander's jaw tightened. He flew. Stan Edgar didn't raise his voice when Homelander stormed into the office. Homelander slammed the door behind him and smiled like a threat. "Where is he?" Homelander demanded. Stan sipped water. "Rick Sanchez is not a soup." Homelander's eyes flashed. "I don't care what he is." Stan's eyes stayed calm. "You will care if you lose." Homelander stepped closer, anger rising like heat. "I don't lose." Stan didn't blink. "You already did. In public." Homelander froze. Stan continued, steady as stone. "He's building something. He's placing devices across the city." Homelander snarled. "So we take them?" Stan nodded. "We will try." Homelander leaned in. "Or I take him." Stan's tone didn't change. "If you destroy half the city to catch one man, you will become a liability." Homelander's smile turned sharp. "I'm not a liability." Stan's eyes held his. "You are a product." That word hit like a slap. Homelander's breathing tightened. Stan spoke calmly into the anger. "Bring him in. Alive. Quietly." Homelander's eyes narrowed. "And if I can't?" Stan's voice was even. "Then you will learn restraint." Homelander laughed, harsh. "Restraint." He turned to leave. Stan added, "Homelander." Homelander stopped. Stan's voice was cold. "Do not let him make you look weak again." Homelander's jaw clenched. He walked out without replying, but the words stayed in him, twisting. Weak. Again. Never again. That night, Butcher came back to the warehouse with a look that told Huey the argument hadn't ended. It had only moved. Followed him in, tired and tense. Annie looked up from the screen. "Where have you been?" Butcher tossed a bag onto the table. Inside were weapons. Not enough to matter against Homelander. Enough to start something anyway. Butcher looked at Rick. "He's coming." Rick didn't look up from wiring the last note. "Good." Annie's face tightened. "How do you know?" Butcher smiled. "Because I made sure." Huey's stomach dropped. "Butcher, what did you do?" Butcher's eyes gleamed. "I sent a message, a little leak, a little bait." Annie stepped forward, furious. "You gave him our location?" Butcher shrugged. "I gave him Rick's location." Rick finally stopped. He looked at Butcher. His voice was calm, and that scared Huey more than shouting. "You did what?" Rick said. Butcher lifted his chin. "You won't do it." "Fine. I'll force the fight." Rick's eyes narrowed. "There are civilians near this place." Butcher's jaw clenched. "Then you better be as smart as you think you are." Annie's hands flared with light. "You're insane." Butcher snapped back. "I'm right." Rick stared at him for a long beat. Then Rick moved. Fast. He slapped a small device onto Butcher's chest. Butcher froze mid-breath, muscles locking. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His eyes went wide with rage. Rick leaned in, voice low. "You don't get to gamble with other people's lives to satisfy your hate." Butcher glared like he wanted to murder him. Rick looked away, already working. He turned to "Evacuate the block." MM's eyes widened. "What?" Rick's voice was flat. "Get people out. Now." Annie swallowed. "Rick, are you going to fight him here?" Rick's fingers flew over the screen. "Not here." Huey stared at the map. "Then where?" Rick tapped a spot on the edge of the city. An old shipping yard. Empty at night. Wide open. No apartments nearby. "We moved the battlefield," Rick said, like adults. Frenchie's voice shook. "How do we make Homelander go there?" Rick's eyes stayed cold. "We don't make him." He tapped another key. A new file began to upload. Annie leaned closer and saw the title line. Homelander, internal footage. Her breath caught. "Rick, is that—" Rick didn't look at her. "It's leverage," Huey whispered. "You're going to leak it." Rick's voice was tight. "Only if I have to." Outside, the air shifted. A low pressure passed over the building, like something huge had flown close. Kimiko moved to the window and peeked out. Her eyes widened. She signed quickly with her hands. Annie understood instantly. "He's here," Annie said. Rick didn't panic. He hit one more switch. Across the city, the collateral damper nodes woke up, one by one, like streetlights turning on. A thin field spread through the air in invisible layers, waiting. Rick grabbed his portal device and opened a green ring. "Go," he snapped. "Everyone through. Now." Huey stared at the portal. "Where does it go?" Rick didn't look at him. "The yard." Shoved people through first. Annie followed, eyes locked on Rick. Frenchie pulled Kimiko in behind him. Huey hesitated. Rick grabbed Huey's collar and shoved him through. Then Rick turned back to Butcher, still frozen. Rick stared at him for 1 second. "You want your monster?" Rick said quietly. "Watch." He opened a small portal under Butcher's feet and dropped him through, still locked, like a statue falling. Then Rick stepped through last. He closed the portal behind him. Just as the warehouse wall exploded inward, Homelander hovered in the hole he had made, face twisted in fury. But the room was empty. He heard only the hum of machines and the drip of broken pipes. He roared, and the city heard it. The shipping yard smelled like salt and old steel. Cranes stood like giant skeletons. Containers formed narrow lanes. The ground was cracked and littered with gravel. Annie stood near Huey, breathing hard. Checked the perimeter like he could control anything here. Frenchie helped Butcher sit up as Rick released the lock on his muscles. Butcher gasped, furious. "You—" Rick held up a finger. "Later." Butcher's eyes burned. "No. Now." Rick ignored him. He looked up at the night sky. His screen showed something that made his jaw tighten. A faint white shimmer far above the city. Not open. Yet. But close. "They felt the beacon earlier," Rick muttered. Annie's face went pale. "They're coming too." Rick nodded once. "Maybe." Huey swallowed. "So we might have Homelander and the trackers at the same time." Rick's eyes stayed on the sky. "Yeah." Then the air screamed. Homelander arrived like a missile, slamming down into the yard and cracking the ground. He rose slowly, smiling. No cameras, no fans, just anger. "You ran," Homelander said, voice low. Rick shrugged. "You followed, like a dog." Homelander's smile twitched. "I'm not a dog." Rick tilted his head. "Prove it." Homelander surged forward, fast, strong, real. His fist hit Rick's shield and the shield flared, cracking at the edges. Rick slid back, boots carving lines in gravel. Homelander hit again. Rick's shield shuddered. Huey flinched. Annie's hands lit up, ready. But she knew her light wouldn't stop that punch. Rick didn't try to outmuscle him. He clicked his portal device. A green ring opened beside Homelander's shoulder. Homelander's punch went through the ring. On the other side, the fist slammed into a steel container, denting it like paper. Homelander yanked his arm back, startled. Rick smirked. Redirect. Homelander snarled and fired his heat vision. The red beam tore toward Rick's face. Rick snapped up a small floating disc. The beam hit the disc and bent upward into the sky, slicing a clean line through a crane's top arm instead of through a person. The crane groaned, metal twisting. Annie's breath caught. "Rick!" Rick's voice was tight. "That's the damper." Homelander looked up as the crane began to fall. He smiled, cruel. like he had found the trick. He fired again, not at Rick, but at the crane's base, trying to make it collapse toward Annie and the others. Rick's eyes flashed. A pulse rippled through the yard. The crane fell, then slowed. Not stopped. Slowed enough. It hit the ground with a heavy crash that sent dust up, but it didn't smash the line where Annie stood. Annie stared, shocked. Rick didn't look at her. He kept watching Homelander. Homelander's smile vanished. He understood. "Are you protecting them?" Homelander hissed. Rick shrugged. "I'm protecting the game board from the toddler." Homelander roared and flew straight at Rick, trying to grab him. Rick opened a portal under his own feet and dropped through it. He popped out on top of a container 10 yards away. Homelander spun in midair and blasted. Rick's shield caught the first blast, flickered on the second, and cracked on the third. Rick's jaw clenched. Homelander's power was not fake. Rick couldn't pretend it was. He had to be smarter. Rick tapped his wrist. A small drone rose behind Homelander and projected a bright image in the air. A simple, brutal thing. Video. Homelander's face, close up in a private room. Homelander yelling. Homelander hurting someone who wasn't a threat. Homelander not heroic. Homelander froze for 1/2 second as the image hit his eyes. His expression twisted, not from guilt, from terror, not of punishment, of being seen. Rick's voice carried across the yard. "You want to be loved so bad you'd burn a city to keep the mask on." Homelander's eyes went red with rage. "Turn it off." Rick didn't. He tapped another key. Across the city, thousands of devices buzzed. Phones, screens, tablets, billboards. The files began to release in pieces, like a flood through too many cracks to plug. Annie's breath hitched. "Rick, you're doing it." Rick's voice was low. Dead man switch. Manual version. Stared at the sky of the city beyond the cranes, where distant screens began to glow and flicker. Frenchie whispered, "Mon Dieu." Butcher's face lit with savage joy. "Yes." Homelander heard it too. Not the files, the shift, the city changing. He looked up, as if he could see every screen at once. His breathing tightened. His smile tried to return. It failed. He lunged at Rick with a scream. Rick met him with a portal the size of a door. Homelander flew through it and slammed into a closed metal chamber. A kill box Rick had built from stacked containers, lined inside with dampers and redirect discs. Homelander hit the wall, and the impact got eaten, softened, redirected upward into nothing. Homelander stood, shaking with fury, and fired his heat vision at the door. The beam bent. It hit his own wall. The wall held. Not forever, but for now. Rick's voice came through a small speaker on the outside, flat and calm. "You're not a god," Rick said. "You're a product having a tantrum." Homelander roared, pounding the wall. The wall buckled. The dampers screamed. Rick watched the readings and knew the truth. Homelander would break out. Soon. He always did. So Rick did the last part fast. He looked up at the sky again. The faint white shimmer above the city had thickened. A ring was forming, not fully open, but pushing. The hunters had smelled the beacon and followed it back. Annie saw it too and went pale. "Rick, look." Rick nodded once. "I know." He made a choice. He slammed the anchor into high output. The warning on his screen screamed. Beacon risk. Maximum. The air over the city tightened like a lid being pressed down. The half-formed white ring above the skyline stuttered. It tried to widen. Rick pushed harder. His nodes across the city glowed in invisible lines, sharing the load. The ring shrank. The white shimmer trembled. For a second, it looked like it would open anyway. Then it snapped shut. like a door being forced closed against someone's hand. Rick's shoulders sagged for one breath. He had done it. But he also knew what it meant. He had shown them the wall. He had proven it was real. Homelander's container chamber exploded outward with a roar of metal. Homelander burst free, eyes blazing, hair wild, face twisted. He saw the city screens in the distance, still glowing with leaked truth. He saw Annie and the others watching him without worship. He saw Rick standing there, calm. Homelander's voice shook. "I will tear you apart." Rick looked at him and didn't blink. "Yeah," Rick said. "Probably." Homelander lunged. Rick opened one last portal. Not a loop, not a trick. A straight drop. Homelander's momentum carried him through, and out over the ocean, far from shore. Homelander caught himself midair, furious, hovering above dark water. He spun back toward the city. Rick raised his portal device again, tired but focused. Homelander hesitated. Not because he was scared of Rick, because he could hear it now. The city. Not cheering, not screaming his name, just noise. Phones. News. Panic. His brand cracking, his control slipping. He glared at Rick like he wanted to kill him with pure hate. Then Homelander turned and shot back toward the city, chasing the fire Rick had started. Rick didn't chase. He watched him go. Annie stepped closer, voice shaking. "You let him leave." Rick looked at her. "I sent him to the problem he cares about most." Annie swallowed. "Himself." Rick nodded. Butcher stepped forward, eyes furious and thrilled at the same time. "You could have finished it." Rick's eyes went cold again. "And then what?" Butcher snapped. "Then it ends." Rick's voice stayed flat. "No. Then you become the next thing people fear. And you'd like that." Butcher's face twisted. Rick looked away before the argument could start again. He stared at his screen. The white ring signatures were quiet. For now. The lock held, and the leak was out. Vought would spin it. Newman would weaponize it. Stan Edgar would adapt. But the truth had teeth now. It couldn't be shoved back into a folder. Rick exhaled slowly. His hands trembled for half a second. Then he steadied them and turned off the anchor's high output before it screamed the city's location again. He looked at Annie, Huey, MM, Frenchie, Kimiko, and even Butcher. "This is your mess," Rick said. "I just kicked the table." Annie's eyes were wet, but her voice was firm. "You saved people," Rick scoffed. "Don't." Huey stepped forward, small but brave. "Are you staying?" Rick stared at him like the word was annoying. Then he shrugged. "For now." Butcher's lips curled. "You'll run." Rick's gaze turned sharp. "Maybe." A beat passed. Then Rick added, quieter. "Or maybe I'm tired of hunters thinking they get to pick their prey." Nobody spoke. The ocean wind blew. The city lights flickered in the distance, changing as the world tried to understand the truth. And high above, somewhere far away, something cold and patient felt the door slam shut and started planning how to knock harder. Later, when the yard had gone quiet and the others had finally stopped moving like they were still in a fight, Rick returned to the warehouse alone. He didn't want company. He never did. But Annie followed anyway, keeping her steps soft so he wouldn't pretend he hadn't heard her. The warehouse smelled like metal and dust and old electricity. Rick sat at his workbench and stared at the anchor frame like it was a problem he couldn't insult away. On a nearby screen, the city's news feeds rolled like a storm. Vought executives, shocked and saddened. Government launching an investigation. Clips of leaked footage flashing on repeat, blurred and cut and copied too fast to erase. Protests forming outside Vought Tower. People yelling. People crying. People filming. Rick watched it without emotion on his face, but his fingers kept tapping, adjusting, tuning. making the lock stronger with each small move. Annie stood behind him for a long moment before she spoke. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Rick didn't look up. "Yes, I did." "You could have left," Annie said. "You had the power. You could have just gone." Rick's jaw tightened. He kept working. "I tried," Rick said. "This universe didn't let me." Annie stepped closer. "That's not what I mean." Rick's hands paused for a breath. Then he said, "Ruff, you want me to say I care?" Annie didn't flinch. "Do you?" Rick let out a short laugh. "I care about not getting hunted." Annie's voice stayed calm. "And the people?" Rick stared at the screen showing a woman holding up her phone, shouting that Vought lied. He stared at a clip of a kid asking why Homelander did what he did. He stared at the fear and the anger and the hope all mixed together. He swallowed once. "People," Rick said quietly, "keep surprising me." Annie nodded, like that was enough. She looked at the anchor frame. "Will it hold?" Rick's eyes stayed on the readings. "It will hold if I don't push it too hard." "And if you do?" Rick's voice was low. "Then it becomes a lighthouse." Annie's stomach tightened. "So we're safe, but not forever." Rick shrugged. "Nothing is forever." He glanced at her, and for a second his eyes looked older than his face. "You want forever," Rick said. "This world doesn't do forever. It does until the next disaster." Annie's voice softened. "Then we keep trying." Rick stared at her like she was speaking another language. Then, against his own habits, he nodded once. "Fine," he said. "You keep trying. I'll keep the door shut." Annie let out a breath. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Rick," she said. Rick didn't look up. "What?" Annie hesitated. "Thank you." Rick grunted like the words annoyed him. "Yeah," he said. "Don't make it a thing." After she left, the warehouse got quiet again. Rick sat alone with the hum of the core and the soft blink of his screens. He reached into his coat and pulled out the one vial he had taken, the refined one, the poison in a perfect bottle. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he locked it inside a small box that didn't show up on any scanner in the room. He didn't trust Vought with it. He didn't trust the hunters with it. And if he was honest, he didn't trust himself either. Rick leaned back in his chair and stared at the warning he had silenced. He had slammed the door on the hunters. He had thrown truth into a world built on lies. He had humiliated the strongest man in the city without killing him. It should have felt like winning. It didn't. It felt like moving from one problem to the next. Rick's screen flickered. A small signal blipped at the edge of the map. Tiny. Clean. A pattern he recognized. Not a full ring. Not an attack. A test. Like someone tapping on a wall to find the weak spot. Rick's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. He watched the signal pulse once, then vanish. Rick exhaled slowly. He opened a new file and typed one line at the top, plain and direct. Upgrades. Then he added a second line under it. Decoys. Then after a pause, he added a third line he didn't like admitting. Civilian safe zones. Rick stared at the words for a moment. He hated that he wrote them. He didn't erase them. Outside, the city kept turning. Vought kept spinning. The boys kept planning. Homelander kept raging. And somewhere beyond the sky, something cold kept learning. Rick leaned forward and went back to work, because the door was shut for now. And for now was the only kind of peace this world ever got.